47 seconds after the first shot, Reza Karim fixed her cuff. The priority flash was still open on her screen. Red border. Maximum classification, the kind of header that made junior officers reach for chairs. Thomas Esquivel, 27 years old and 3 years into a posting he had chosen because he liked birds and quiet, stood 6 meters away with his hand frozen above his console. He was watching the screen. Her left hand moved to her right sleeve, found a loose thread at the cuff button, and pressed it flat. 7 seconds, she counted them. Not because she was calculating, not yet. Because this was the only grief she allowed herself. 7 seconds, clean and private before the work began. She had done it in a relay station outside Nairobi when the Drac VL first crossed the border marker. She had done it in a pressurized corridor on a station above the Port Gauge transit belt when the council voted to classify humanity as a provisional species pending review. 7 seconds. Every time. The grief was real. The 7 seconds were the container she kept it in. On the 8th second, she opened the channel. Esquivel, read me the classification on Colony 7. His voice came back flat, the affect of a man containing panic by making it sound like data. Military adjacent infrastructure, ma'am. Drac VL fleet designation. No council vote on record. The order is already executing. Across the common center, the relay displays began logging strike signatures, clean geometric patterns. The kind that meant the targeting was deliberate, not opportunistic. Colony 7 had no military garrison. It had a water reclamation facility, a commercial transit hub, 3 schools built from prefabricated panels, and 400,000 people who had woken up that morning without any particular reason to believe it would be their last. The smell of the common center was recycled air and warm electronics, the particular dry heat of a room where systems had been running at full capacity for 6 hours straight. Reza did not sit down. What comes next is not a battle. Stay close anyway. The file that arrived 11 seconds later carried Dohan Clark's identifier. Owen was 3rd IFR, Glasgow born, and had spent 5 years embedded in Salva and archival stations doing work that did not officially exist. His messages were always short. This one was for lines. The first line read KLTH acted alone. No full council authorization. Legal challenge window. 14 minutes from first strike, clock running. The second line, Mateo's data uploaded automatically. 72 hours ago, before you went dark. The third line was a set of coordinates, Drac VL fleet communication relay frequencies, precise to 6 decimal points, clearly not obtained through any method the council would have approved. The fourth line was blank. Reza read all 4 lines once. She did not read them again. Esquivel. Her voice carried no more weight than if she were asking him to adjust the room's atmospheric settings. Pull up the theoretical exercise. The one you filed 18 months ago, commercial grid topology. A pause. She counted those 2, but differently. Ma'am, that's a trading document. It was never. Pull it up. The file appeared on the secondary display. Title: The Commercial Grid is Emergency Evacuation Topology, a Theoretical Framework for Non-Military Population Displacement. Filed by T. Esquivel. Posted to a EGISGRID internal archive. Flagged theoretical, no practical application. Beneath the title, a timestamp. Beneath that, the first line of the executive summary. In a scenario where military response is unavailable or inadvisable, civilian shipping infrastructure may be repurposed as an emergency evacuation network with an activation lead time of approximately 30 seconds, provided the following conditions are met. The following conditions were met. Outside the viewport, 14 minutes and 19 seconds remained before KLTH's unilateral civilian targeting became accepted galactic precedent. Every second that passed without a legal challenge locked the doctrine permanently into the Council's operational record, a foundation that future commanders could cite, build on, and expand. 400,000 people were the test case. If the doctrine held, every human colony within Drac VL fleet range became, in the language of the filing, military adjacent infrastructure. Tomas was still looking at her. She looked at the file. Run it, she said. His hand did not shake when he entered the command. She noticed that. She filed it away, X to his name, in the part of her memory she kept for things that mattered. The script activated at CDH station time. Tomas looked up from his console and said, in the same flat voice he used for atmospheric settings and sensor caliradians, "It's not a weapon, ma'am. It's a traffic pattern. Every cargo hauler in sector just became a lifeboat." Good, Reza said. 30 seconds earlier, the hardest thing Thomas Esquivel had done all shift was decide whether to reheat his coffee. The canteen had been sitting at the corner of his console since Wudia Sushifan. Cold by now, the particular stale cold of recycled water that had been heated once and abandoned. He had picked it up twice, set it down twice, because reheating it meant crossing to the unit on the far wall, and he kept thinking he should stay at the console in case something came in. Nothing had come in for 4 hours. His field guide to Earth Sparrows lay open beside the canteen. Spine cracked at the page for the House Sparrow, which he had been meaning to read for 6 days. That was 30 seconds before the priority flash. Before the strike on Colony 7, Thomas Esquivel had 3 published papers on emergency logistics, 0 field postings, and a theoretical exercise that 3 senior officers had reviewed and filed without comment. He was known in the AEGISGRID pool for being thorough, quiet, and occasionally disruptive in briefings because he asked questions that implied the briefer had not thought something through. He was not known for being decisive. He was not known for much at all. The commercial grid exercise had started as a thought experiment on a slow Tuesday, 6 months into his posting. The question he had asked himself was simple: if you had to move a civilian population with no military assets and no time to requisition them, what would you use? The answer had taken him 11 days to map: cargo lanes, passenger liner routes, commercial relay frequencies, automated manifest systems. All of it already existed, already maintained, already capable of receiving priority overrides under emergency trade protocols that predated the current council charter by 200 years. The override codes were not classified. They were simply not used because no one had thought of using them for this. He had filed the exercise and forgotten it. 3 years later, Owen Clark had found the 14-minute legal window in the Salva archives, a procedural gap in the Council's military authorization framework, a crack in the foundation that KLTH had apparently calculated no one would exploit in time. Owen had sent the gap to Reza 6 weeks ago with a single annotation: if they ever move fast, this is the answer. Reza had sent it to Tomas with no annotation at all. He had read it once, understood what she meant without her saying it, and updated his theoretical exercise to account for a 14-minute activation window instead of the hour he had originally assumed. 28 seconds. That was how long the script took to run. 2 seconds he had spent confirming the override codes were still valid. The field guide was still open to the House Sparrow when the evacuation began. In the observation buoy drifting at the outer edge of the Colony 7 sensor range, Vale and Ohms had been awake for 19 hours. He was not supposed to be here. His assignment was archival, cataloging the Council's historical session records, a task that required presence in the main station, absolutely no proximity to active military engagements. He was 81 years old, which in Salva and terms meant he had been awake for 63 years of Council service and had accumulated enough institutional memory to constitute, as one junior colleague had once put it, a small library that occasionally asked for tea. His tendrils were dim, had been dim for 6 hours, since the fleet movement data first crossed his archival feeds, and he had understood with the particular cold clarity of someone who had watched 37 species make catastrophic decisions what KLTH Drac VL intended to do. He had filed a formal query through official channels. The query was still pending review. He had filed a secondary notification through the Council's emergency legal framework. That notification required 2 senior signatures before it could be escalated. One of the senior officers was in a session. The other was Drac VL. So Vale and Ohm had done something he had not done in 40 years. He had taken his personal observation buoy to the edge of Colony 7's sensor range, pulled out an old lit pulse cipher unit that communicated on frequencies so ancient the Council's automated monitoring systems did not bother to log them, and sent 3 flashes toward the AEGISGRID command station. He did not know if anyone there still knew the cipher. He waited. Across the void, the console's brightness adjusted twice. Valen's tendrils pulsed once, sharply, and he touched the relay node with 2 fingers before transmitting. An old habit, an archival blessing, ensuring the record was clean before anything was committed to it. His people believed that a message sent without that touch was a message the universe might choose not to preserve. He was not certain he believed it anymore. He did it anyway. You are not the first species they have done this to. He transmitted, in a cipher that had not been used for a diplomatic communication since before Reza Karim was born. You are the first who built an exit before they built a wall. The response came back in 12 seconds. 3 words, in the same cipher. Fleet relay frequencies. He sent them. What Vale and Ohm observed next, he would spend for days attempting to categorize correctly in the archival record. The first thing he noticed was Reza Karim's stillness. On the buoy's passive visual feed, low resolution. Thermal adjacent. The kind of imaging that showed heat signatures more clearly than faces she had not moved in 47 seconds after the priority flash arrived. In Salva, in physiology, that duration of complete physical stillness following a threat stimulus indicated cognitive shutdown, the moment when a mind received more information than it could integrate and simply stop. Valen had seen it in council sessions, in junior archivists confronted with contradictory historical records, in species representatives who heard news about their home systems and found that their bodies refused to carry the weight of it. He began composing a secondary message, something gentle, something that might, he hoped to help, prompt her systems back into function. He had transmitted the first word when the evacuation began. The commercial shipping lanes around Colony 7 did not explode into activity. They did not broadcast alerts. The change was quieter than that, and in Valen's experience, the quiet changes were always the ones worth preserving in the record. Cargo haulers that had been holding standard transit paths simply altered course. Passenger liners running scheduled routes between the colony's transit hub and the secondary belt stations received automated priority overrides and redirected. An ice mining barge called the Sundarbands registered to a 3-person family operation out of the outer belt, carrying 40 tons of frozen methane and a manifest that included, inexplicably, 4 crates of emergency protein rations that someone had apparently forgotten to offload at the last port received an override signal and turned toward Colony 7. Valen watched it happen across 7 different data feeds simultaneously, because that was how Salva and archivists processed complex events in parallel streams, each feed representing a different layer of the same moment, all of them filing into the same long-term record simultaneously. He stopped composing his secondary message. On his primary archival feed, a new registry entry appeared. Colony 7's civilian transponders were reclassifying in real time from residential population to commercial transit passengers. 400,000 people, becoming, in the language of the Galactic Shipping Registry, cargo. His tendrils went dim, then dimmer, then, for 2.3 seconds, completely dark. He touched the relay node with 2 fingers, filed the image, then sent a query to the AISG RID frequency on the lip pulse cipher. Please confirm one of your designated evacuation vessels is listed in the Galactic Registry as a refrigerated transport for cultured dairy products. Registry designation from Aged Diaspir. Current passenger manifest 847 civilians. Destination secondary transit hub. Sector 4. Is this correct? The response came back in 4 seconds. Note the time. Valen stared at the cipher display for a long moment. Then he filed the exchange in the archival record under a category he created on the spot: human operational communication, apparent confirmation of successful execution, idiomatic verification method. Species specific. He was not certain. Note the time was a confirmation. He was not certain it was anything other than a confirmation. The distinction troubled him in a way he could not immediately categorize, and things that could not be immediately categorized troubled Vale and Ohm deeply. Across 6 additional data feeds, 2,847 commercial vessels continued their quiet, unhurried, completely illegal under normal circumstances reclassification of 400,000 human beings into temporary cargo. On the 7th feed, the one he kept for personal observations, the one that never went into the official record, Vale N wrote for words. They were already moving. On the Drak Vag flagship, Commander Kel Th Drak VL received his first contradictory data report at 7:18 M41. The report was simple. Colony 7's civilian transponders were dropping off the targeting grid. Not destroyed. The structural readings were stable. No thermal signatures, consistent with casualties. No debris field forming. The population was simply becoming, in the language of his targeting computers, unlocatable. His carapace plates shifted and locked with a sound like a bolt sliding home. The fleet's targeting systems were functioning correctly. He had verified this 3 times in 30 seconds because his first assumption was equipment malfunction, and his second assumption was a human jamming signal, and his third assumption, the one he did not share with his bridge crew, was something else entirely. Something that did not fit neatly into the categories he had built his career inside. He looked at the display, not at his crew. Recalibrate. Full spectrum. All targeting bands. Yes, Commander. The recalibration took 40 seconds. The result was the same. Colony 7 had a water reclamation facility, a commercial transit hub, 3 schools, and a population that was, according to every sensor his fleet carried, currently in transit aboard a refrigerated dairy transport, an ice mining barge, 11 passenger liners, 416 cargo freighters, and 2,417 additional commercial vessels that had no business being within targeting range and every legal right to be there. His plates did not shift again. He was recalculating. In the corner of the display, a timer read 9 minutes, 41 seconds. The 14-minute legal challenge window was still open. Owen Clark's broadcast had reached the council frequencies 40 seconds ago. Vale N. Ohm's formal motion, filed with 2 improper signatures and a procedural note that would take a council clerk approximately 4 minutes to notice, was entirely valid, was setting him a cue. KLTH looked at the display, at the numbers, at the 400,000 transponders moving steadily, unhurriedly, aboard vessels carrying cheese and frozen methane and, apparently, the future of galactic military doctrine. He recalculated. Same answer. The colony was emptying. Not by force, not by panic, by traffic management. He had prepared for human weapons. He had studied their wars, mapped their escalation patterns, concluded that their brutality was their primary strategic tool and their primary strategic weakness simultaneously. He had prepared for human weapons because that was what humans used. On his secondary display, a registry flag appeared from HD Esper passenger count updated 847 civilians. Alvarez nominal. Beter's secondary hub 6 minutes. He did not slam his fist. He recalculated. Outside, in the dark between his fleet and Colony 7, the stars held their positions, patient, indifferent. Old, the chess knight on Reza Karim's console caught no light at all, sitting where her hand had left it. At the edge of the board, she played against herself on slow nights when the work was waiting and the decisions were already made and all that remained was the discipline of not moving too soon. She had not touched it yet. She was still counting. At 7:19 and 22, Thomas A. Squivel's water canteen was empty. He had reached for it without looking, the way people reach for things they expect to be there. His hand found the canteen, tilted it, set it back down. Still empty. He had not filled it before the shift began. He did not fill it now. He returned his hand to the console and continued reading the evacuation feed, vessel by vessel, because someone needed to watch the numbers, and he was the one who knew what the numbers meant. 11 minutes remained in the legal challenge window. On the primary display, the colony's population counter was moving, not down sideways, technically, reclassifying in real time as commercial transit passengers rather than residential civilians. The targeting computers on KLTH's fleet were receiving the same data Vale and Ohm was receiving. The same data Owen Clark was broadcasting on council frequencies. The same data that 2,847 commercial vessels were generating simply by doing what commercial vessels did, moving. Logging manifests, updating registry entries, carrying people from one place to another in the patient, unhurried language of trade. Reza stood at the central console. She had not moved in for minutes. Not stillness from paralysis, stillness from the discipline of not touching a process that was running correctly. Every instinct she had was trained toward intervention, toward the adjustment, the correction, the hand on the wheel. Doing nothing, when the thing was working, was the hardest skill she had ever practiced. The chess knight sat at the edge of her console. She had set it there before the shift began, the way she always did, moved from her quarters to the board beside the console, played both sides through a middle game she had been running for 3 weeks. Then set the knight at the corner of the board where her hand could find it without looking. An anchor. Something from before whatever came next. She had not touched it since the evacuation began. In the observation buoy at the edge of Colony 7's sensor range, Vale N. Ohm was revising his archival entry for the 4th time. The problem was the stillness. He had categorized Reza Karim's 47 seconds of motionlessness as cognitive shutdown. He had built his secondary message around that categorization. He had been composing something general, something that might prompt her systems back into function, when the evacuation activated 30 seconds after the priority flash, precisely undismantled his categorization entirely. He had watched the stillness. He had watched what came after it. These were not the same phenomenon. In Salva and psychology, stillness under threat had one meaning: the mind has stopped. There was no secondary meaning. The archives he had maintained for 63 years contained no record of stillness as preparation. Stillness as discipline. Stillness is the container you kept grief in so it did not contaminate the work. He had no category for it. His tendrils pulsed slowly, the rhythm of deep archival processing the biological signal that his mind was filing something into long-term record rather than working memory. He touched the relay node with 2 fingers before he transmitted the revision. Amendment to prior observation: human subject exhibited 47-second stillness response to threat stimulus. Initial classification: cognitive shutdown. Classification revised unknown. Behavior followed immediately by decisive coordinated action with no observable transition period. Salva an archival record contains no precedent. Filing is category pending. He stared at the words. Then added. The stillness was not the pause before action. The stillness was the action. He did not know if that was accurate. He filed it anyway, because it was the most honest thing he could write. And in 63 years of archival work, he had learned that honest imprecision was more valuable than precise dishonesty. 8 minutes remained. At 7:21 am 14, Owen Clark's broadcast reached the council chamber. Owen was not present for this. He was in a relay station 14 light minutes from Colony 7, in a room that smelled of insulation foam and stressed metal, watching a secondary feed of the council chamber's reaction because the primary feed required a clearance level he did not technically have. His cover as a research associate at the Salva and archival station had held for 5 years. It would not hold past today. He had known this when he sent the first message to Reza. He had sent it anyway, because Mateo's data was already uploaded and Mateo was already gone and someone needed to use what Mateo had found. The legal filing was precise. 14 months of archival research, compressed into 6 pages of procedural challenge. KLTH Drac Val had authorized a strike against civilian infrastructure without full council approval. Relying on a definitional gap in the military authorization framework, the phrase military adjacent had no binding legal definition in the current charter. He had assumed the gap would hold. He had assumed that by the time anyone identified the crack, the precedent would already be set. He had not assumed Matteo Ricci would spend 3 weeks mapping every targeting coordinate in the Drac VL forward staging area and upload the data automatically on a timer, 72 hours before his last transmission. The council chamber received the filing at 7:21 am 14. The Brett Hari delegates went flat immediately, not from principle. From instinct. Flat meant uncomfortable. Uncomfortable meant the calculation had shifted. The Vort EH representatives' limbs stopped their deliberate sequencing for 3.1 seconds, which was, for Vort EH, the equivalent of a complete systems halt. The Drac VL block's response arrived 11 seconds later, a counter-filing, asserting the legality of the strike on grounds of military necessity. It was well prepared. It had clearly been ready before the strike began. Vale and Ohm received a copy of both filings simultaneously, because he had set his archival feeds to capture everything. He read the Drac Vel counter-filing once, identified for procedural errors that would take a council clerk approximately 7 minutes to notice, and added them to his formal motion with annotations. His tendrils were bright now, the biological signal of active filing, of information moving from intake to record. He was working. 6 minutes remained. On the colony's sensor grid, the population counter read 217, 0 in transit, 183, 0 remaining. The number was moving faster now, because the initial surge of departing vessels had cleared the transit hub's approach lanes and the remaining haulers could move without queuing. Tomas Esquivel watched the number. He did not refill his canteen. He had forgotten it existed. Bam! His voice was the same flat affect as before, but something had shifted underneath it, a steadiness that had not been there at the start of the shift. The voice of someone who had been terrified and had stayed at the console anyway and was now, on the other side of the terror, simply present. 416 cargo freighters have cleared Colony 7 airspace. The Drac VL targeting lock cannot. The computers can't lock civilians who are listed as cargo manifests. They have to fire on commercial vessels registered under trade protection. I know, Reza said. That would be an act of war against every species that uses those trade lanes. I know. He looked at her. You know they wouldn't. She did not answer. The answer was not in what she said. It was in the chess knight at the edge of the console, sitting exactly where it always sat, on slow nights when the decisions were already made. 4 minutes remained, 3 minutes and 40 seconds into the legal window. Commander KLTH Drac VL made a decision. He did not announce it. He looked at the display at the population counter, at the commercial vessel registry, at Owen Clark's legal filing, at Valen Ohm's formal motion with its 4 annotated procedural errors, and he recalculated. The calculation took him 90 seconds. His carapace plates did not shift during those 90 seconds. His bridge crew did not speak. In Drac V. Elcom and culture, the commander's silence was absolute authority. It meant the decision was forming. An interruption was not a category that existed. The calculation finished. Same answer. The colony was empty. Not destroyed. Not hidden. Relocated. Via 2,847 commercial vessels. In 11 minutes and 14 seconds. without a single military asset, without a single weapon, without a single casualty. The legal challenge was valid. His unilateral action was exposed. And in the council chamber, the Brett Hari delegate was already turning toward the human observer's seat, the one that had been empty for 3 sessions because humanity's council status was provisional pending review, and the question of whether that seat was about to become significantly less provisional was the kind of question that made fur flatten and limbs stop and old archivist touch relay nodes and breathe. He did not rage. He did not slam his fist. He sat in the stillness of a commander who had prepared for the wrong war, and he understood with the particular cold clarity of someone who had studied human conflict for 30 years that he had bioweapon. He had been defeated by a cargo manifest, that 723M41, the last of Colony 7's civilian transponders reclassified to commercial transit status. The population counter reached 0. Not because anyone was dead, because 400,000 people were. At that moment, legally and logistically, passengers on vessels registered under galactic trade protection, and the Drakveti Ulf fleet's targeting computers had nothing to lock. Reza Karim set the carved wooden chest knight beside the console as the warship display stopped responding. Not on the board. Beside it. Place. Not move. Her grandfather had carried it from Karachi through 3 cities and a continents before it ended up in a box that traveled with Reza from posting to posting, station to station, through 11 years of work that most people in her life did not know the precise nature of. He had played chess against himself on slow evenings, the same way she did, working through middle games with no opponent because the discipline of the game was in seeing all the moves, not in winning. She had never told anyone that. The knight sat where it sat. It was not a signal. It was not a ritual. It was a piece from a board that had belonged to someone she missed. Placed at the end of a thing that was over. On his archival feed, Valen Ohm logged the gesture. He could not interpret it. He filed it under unclassified ritual behavior preceding decisive action, second instance. Then he paused, deleted the categorization. Filed it instead under human post-action behavior category pending. Note object appears consistent across both instances. Significance unknown. Preservation priority high. He touched the relay node with 2 fingers. The 3rd time. Owen Clark's voice reached the command center 11 seconds later, through the relay on Tomas's console, compressed, slightly clipped at the edges. The voice of someone who had been in a room alone for a very long time and was now speaking to people for the first time in hours. Legal challenge is holding. KLTH's counterfiling has for procedural errors. The Brett Hari delegate has requested a recess. The VOR-TH block has gone quiet. A pause. Then we're going to need someone to fill that observer seat. Reza looked at Tomas. Tomas looked at his empty canteen. Note the time? She said. The Mercy Charter Council was not named by Reza Karim, or by Tomas Esquivel, or by Owen Clark, or by Valen Ohm, who would have preferred something more archival-like precise. It was named by the Brett Hari delegate. During the recess, in a conversation that was not officially recorded but that Valen Ohm logged anyway because he had learned, in 63 years, that the unofficial conversations were always the ones that mattered, the Brett Hari delegate had turned to a Salva and junior archivist and said, simply, we need a new charter, one with mercy in it. The junior archivist had filed the phrase. Valen had preserved the filing. The council chamber's damaged relay was replaced by a human-maintained node within 48 hours. The species that had evacuated 400,000 people through a refrigerated dairy transport and an ice mining barge now held the primary communications connection for the governing body of 23 spacefaring civilizations. The preamble of the Mercy Charter listed 14 names. Reza Karim attended the signing ceremony alone. The reading of the preamble took for minutes, 1 name at a time, each with a line of service record, a home city, a posting history. Tomas Esquivel, Lima, 3 years. Owen Clark, Glasgow, 5 years. And then, 11 names later, Matteo Ricci, Bologna, 3 years. Status missing. Presumed watching. The reader paused after his name. Not from protocol. From something else. Matteo had been 29 years old. He had kept a handwritten notebook, not digital. Not backed up. Not filed in any system of every evacuation corridor he had ever scouted. The entries were precise, brief, written in the particular shorthand of someone who expected to use them again. The last entry, dated 72 hours before his final transmission, read Colony 7, Cargo Lane Delta 9. Clean. The notebook had been found on his station. The data pointed toward had been uploaded automatically on the timer he had set, and had given Tomas Esquivel the exact targeting coordinates that made the evacuation possible. He had not come back for the notebook. The reader finished the preamble. The chamber was quiet for 8 seconds, a long time, in a room with 23 species in it, each measuring silence differently. Reza did not speak during those 8 seconds. She was counting. The rebuilt con and center smelled different from the old one. Same recycled air. Same warm electronics. Same dry heat of systems running at full capacity. But the relay node in the corner was new, human maintained. Thomas's installation. The connector housing still carrying the faint chemical smell of fresh adhesive sealant. The viewport had been recalibrated. The stars outside were the same stars. They looked different anyway. The way things look different when the room you see them from has changed. Reza stood at the central console. The board was set up beside it middle game. Both sides, the position she had been running for 3 weeks before the crisis and had not touched since. The knight was beside the board. Not on it. Vale and Ohm's final archival entry had arrived that morning. She had read it once. It was 12 sentences long, which for Vale N was extraordinarily brief. The last 4 sentences read, in the formal citation style of Salva and archival record. Human response to threat stimulus, 47 seconds of stillness, followed by 30 seconds of decisive action, followed by 11 minutes of logistical execution, followed by successful relocation of 400 civilians via 847 commercial vessels with 0 casualties. Archival classification of initial stillness revised from cognitive shutdown to controlled preparation. Duration of revision process 4 days. This archivist notes, for the record, that the revision took longer than the evacuation. She had not replied. There was nothing to say that the record did not already contain. The console chimed. Not the priority flash sound that was a 2-tone. Descending. This was a single tone. Mid-frequency. The sound assigned to low priority incoming signals on secondary monitoring bands. The kind of frequency that ran in the background, logging automated pings. The quiet maintenance traffic of systems that kept broadcasting because no one had told them to stop. Matteo Ricci's transponder frequency. The ping was 47 hours early. Reza looked at the console, at the frequency identifier, at the timestamp in the upper corner of the display, which read to 7 p.m. 33, which was not 47 hours after the last ping, which meant this was not the automated cycle, which meant it was something else. Her hand moved to the console. The knight was beside her and grandfather's piece, carried from Karachi to here, from a slow evening chess game to 11 postings to the edge of a war that had ended before anyone fired a capital ship. Beside the board, placed. She reached for the console. The channel opened. Outside the viewport, the stars held their positions. The from-aged Espier was somewhere out there, registered in the Galactic Shipping Registry as a refrigerated dairy transport. Its passenger manifest cleared, its cargo hold empty, its automated systems cycling through the same routine checks they had been running before 400,000 people had needed a way out, and a 27-year-old comms officer had looked at a refrigerated dairy transport and seen a lifeboat. Tomas Esquivel was at his station. His canteen was full. He had filled it this morning, the first thing, before the console came online, before the feeds loaded, before anything else required his attention. The field guide to Earth's Barrows was closed on his left. He did not look at Reza when the channel opened. He looked at his display. His hands were steady. The signal from Matteo's frequency lasted 3 seconds. Then it stopped. The console's secondary display showed the source coordinates, deep in Drac VL space, the same location the transponder had been pinging from for weeks, automated. Or a warning. Or something the records did not yet have a category for. Reza's hand stayed on the console. The channel was open. The signal had stopped. The stars outside the viewport did not move. The chess knights at where she had placed it beside the board, not on it, at the end of something, or the beginning of something else, in the particular silence of a room where someone is deciding whether to wait or to move. She had 30 seconds. She used all of them.